Zarathustra's theory, which was what gave birth to religion, was basically about humans becoming gods, which is a very different
That's
view.
the part that I want to talk
It's a very
about.
different view, right, on life, which I mean, personally, I've adopted a lot of that in my own life, but I believe, I'm a big believer, not in worship, but in basically mastery.
You think a lot of people disagree with that type of...
Of course, because I think we've been trained, right, for 20 years to follow...
To bow to mastery, to a master.
We've been taught to worship and believe in something greater that we can't comprehend, which is fair, that's okay. But we've also been taught that when things get hard, to pray. And I think that is where the biggest issue arose in religion, is basically what the idea of religion was, right? The whole doctrine of religion is basically order. But order is good, because in a chaotic, disordered world, you need order to create growth.
Agreed.
And I think this is what a lot of people never realized, right? People shun society, they shun the church. They don't like the idea of the church, society. Like, these are control mechanisms. They're for sheep, they're controlling people. But they're necessary control mechanisms.
Yeah, I think people would go absolutely insane.
Right, well, they're necessary.
Mental illness would be like one of the biggest problems
more
in the
than
world.
that, it would be crime, it would be, everything.
Yeah, like people would just go psychotic.
Right, but you remember that when you look at society's evolution, you have to go from a state of disorder to a state of controlled order.
Right.
Now, one of the keys to controlling order, while it may seem like a prison to most people watching, it's really not. So it's the idea of providing guidelines. It's when people don't know how to operate within the guidelines, that find success within it, that they basically become prisoners of it.
Right.
That is the problem. The
like
problem,
they live by it almost.
Like, for example, society is just like a religion in itself. It's a corporate religion. Like religion was like, hey, bow to, and make sure you're knowing who your master is, right?
Right.
And then society is like, hey, know who your leader is. It's the same thing, basically.
Right.
It's just telling you, like, these people will dictate basically how life will work for you, and you will function within this space, and they will have the police to enforce it,
Right. Yeah.
And the idea of society, the power behind society, is that there is a path, and it becomes a very predictable game. Like, we know that in society, success is measured by money. So we know that the more money you make, the more control you have over society. Now, a lot of people would say, well, this is unfair. And I would argue, no, we all play in the same sandbox. Some of us learn how to play in the sandbox better. And I think that when you look at society as an evil or as a issue, and you go, oh, society sucks, it breeds
like you don't want to play a part of it,
right? But then you are forced to live in it.
Right.
So you cannot just ignore it. I mean, I've argued this with you 100 times that
100%.
as a creative mind,
right.
like when people are creative, like I consider myself creative. You're a creative talent, meaning that's
like
what you do.
You want to separate yourself from society and not partake in it at all.
Well, you feel anytime someone gives you a constraint, creativity goes, whoa, wait a minute, like that's not for me. That's not for me.
Right.
Like, I'm not going to be there. Now, the problem is not that you want out of this prison, which is fair. Like, everybody should want out of this prison. But you should get out in a way that doesn't make you go back to it.
Right.
And reminds you to get stuck in it.
That's a good point.
Right? So I think that
right.
the argument is not to escape or not.
Instead of learning how to master, like your teaching is like master society.
Well,
right? Like
master it, and then graduate it.
Right.
Versus reject it, and be stuck
and then
in its spider webs where you can't get out.
Right,
so you can master it and say, I've made enough money, I've learned how the game works. I'm choosing now to remove myself with my money and go into this other country or this other state.
So would you say that you've done that? Like, would you say that you've graduated society and now you're in a place where you're looking from the outside in and you see everything going on?
Correct. That's what happens. Once you the basic concept of life is the mastery of circumstance, the mastery of society, and the mastery of life.
Which is
one cannot find their purpose without understanding how or what role they play in the grand scheme of things. So if they do not pay attention to what's happening around them, they will forever be the victim of what is happening anyways that they have no control over. Like, we understand that most of us have very limited control on society. We vote, we basically pay taxes, but we don't have as much pull as we want. If we see something we don't like, we can't be like, I don't like that cop. I'm paying taxes, so I'm independently firing this man, right? We have to go through a process for that.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is, when you don't go through that process, you fall victim to that. We see this in a lot of poor communities across the U.S., right? We talked about this in the last show. We said people complain about government, but the poor need the government the most.
Right.
Because the government is basically functioning for the poor.
Right.
Now, the poor will argue the government is functioning for the rich.
Yeah.
Like most poor people, and if I say poor, don't get offended. If you're financially not capable of having freedom, where you are forced to do things for money that you don't want to do, that a job you don't want to have, and aren't in a capacity to buy your life over at least 5 times, you're poor. So that puts a large function of people in that.
Yep.
But if you are, is that you too?
It's like, I'm in that box there that you're talking about.
But that's okay. So yeah, that's okay. Well, you got to be there to get out of it.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's okay. But what I was saying is basically, if you are that person, usually you look and you go, the rich pay less taxes.
Yeah.
You know, they're getting better benefits from this. This law is helping them. But think about it. Why do laws help the rich? Because they don't need management.
Right.
Right?
So you're saying that everybody who's rich has graduated society? Because I don't think that's the case either.
Like, so
I think
yes.
a lot of people...
No. So yes, they've graduated society, not life.
Okay.
So there's a very big difference. Meaning, money is the common denominator in society. That if you have a lot of money, you're above the societal control mechanisms.
Right, like you figured something out.
Well, no, you could have inherited money, but you're above the societal control mechanisms. Yeah. Meaning, you are not reliant on society for order.
Right.
So why does that matter? Because you're not dependent on society on which doctor you can see. You're not dependent on society as to which laws you can or can't follow. Like, think about, we talked about this last time about abortion. Someone says, well, listen, we are here in this state. Let's say we're let's say we use a state like Alabama, maybe, where they don't have women's rights and, they're trying to ban abortions. Like, you have that basically, right? If you live in Alabama and you're rich, you're super rich, you live in a castle, suddenly your girlfriend is pregnant and she doesn't want to have a baby for any given reason. Well, you fly to any other state and you take care of it. Or you go to Europe and you take care of it. Like, the constraints of the law is not an orderly issue for you. However, if you're a poor person, right, and you don't have the means to even get out of your city, well, how can you induce the cost of flying to another state, being comfortable for a week, taking off work for a week, being and going through a surgical procedure or a medical procedure, and then coming back to work and saying, okay, my life is back to normal. Right. So the choice is no longer yours. Meaning like the money restraint. Okay. So the order is created by government. So basically government creates order for the poor. Now, here's again one thing that they don't understand. Government does not work for the rich. Government stays away from the rich. That's the key that people misunderstand. Like someone would argue, rich people pay less taxes. Right? Well, I have paid more taxes last year than probably everybody in this street, like collectively.
Yeah.
Now, so how do I pay less taxes than you, for example? Well, that's not true.
Right.
That's not how it works, right? Now, here's the argument. People will say Amazon pays less taxes. Amazon paid $0 in federal taxes last year. So they go, how is that possible? You make $1 trillion and you pay 0 tax. But that's not how it works. That's how the media frames things for you to misunderstand. So what has Amazon paid? Nothing? Fair. They had to pay, let's say, $20 billion.
Right.
The government said, listen, we, as a government, don't want to be involved in this process around making all of this side of the city you have your warehouse in. We don't want to deal with any of these city projects. We just can't afford to, or we don't want to. You can get a tax deduction if you take $20 billion and build 3 schools, 17, windmills, this and that, because the city needs it.
Right.
So Amazon goes, well, great. So we'll invest in a business that basically owns a bunch of schools. So the government will say, well, great. Well, now we have a problem solved because you built schools, windmills, and these things.
Smart.
Right? And now, instead of paying taxes, you got a deduction.
Yeah.
So did you not pay taxes? Well, you didn't want a school. You didn't want to invest. So basically what you did is you chose, do I just give away money?
Right.
Or do I take it in my own hands and build these things and probably do a better job than the government at building a school and, knowing what happens. Right. But then here's where the angle gets interesting for people that don't understand. So in order to do that, you have to set up a new business. Now, if you're smart, well, that business also makes money.
Right.
And this constant reinvestment in the economy and these things happen. So in the end, you still sit there and you go, well, they didn't pay any taxes. But a lot of the concepts that you've come accustomed to, like maybe an observatory in LA that you go to or anything else, is basically funded by these tax deductions.
Yeah.
So while you enjoy going to that observatory, or you enjoy going to that school, or you make sure that that art theater is open, or that these windmills are there, so there's your energy bill is cheaper, you're also not realizing the interconnectedness to how the money is flowing through these major companies into infrastructure. So what you see is basically the media spill on one side of the coin that says, listen, these guys aren't paying any taxes. And that's the problem, is that we talked about this last week. People don't research. They basically just get fed things.
Yeah.
Like from just watching this video, some people won't actually go research, like, oh, why did Amazon pay no taxes? You know?
They'll just take what you said.
Right, or they'll research it, and the first link that pops up, they'll click it, and they'll be like, oh yeah, that article said they didn't.
Right.
But that's not research. That's just like, it's like saying, I don't really care.
Right.
I'm just basically like, what are you saying? Like, look at how many awesome articles came out on coronavirus. Like thousands. Some were political, some were real, some were medical, some were theoretical, like what it could be, why it's changing. And what I'm saying is so many people just watch one side. They go on one political-based channel and they go, oh yeah, this is messed up, or oh, this is great, it's not really, it's like the flu, it doesn't matter. So like what I'm saying is they're not really broadening their horizon and understanding a real three-dimensional picture of like what are all the opportunities out there to understand about this, and what are the commonalities across the speeches. Like what are all doctors saying, what are some saying, what are not.
Right.
When you get that together, you start realizing, when you get all of that information together, you start making your conclusion.
Right.
Based on real perspective of understanding the matter, right? And something that a lot of people don't do,
That makes sense.
And I think that's the big part,
Right. So how does that? Okay, so you're saying that a lot of if you're poor, you're in this like cycle of just watching the world happen. And you're like a victim of it.
Well, you're just not participating in it. Like right. You're not participating in it.
I think that's the key thing about the Superman thing that interested me, because when I watched a couple of these videos and when you were kind of like informing me about the whole theory, I started to realize that as a man, like I felt myself being like, dude, I'm not a fucking man. Like I should be playing a bigger role.
You're half a man.
Yes. By height, I am half a man. But it makes you like want to step up when you know.
That's the point. Yeah.
When because you look at some of these people, man, like 30 years old and they're going to their regular day job and they can't even contribute to their own life.
You have to believe you're inadequate.
Yeah.
To change.
So I'm saying for everybody watching this right now who feels almost like their own masculinity is being questioned based on what how they're contributing.
Yeah,
to
but
the world.
Understand how change occurs in humans, right? Change occurs when we're.
Give it to me like this. How do you become a Superman?
Well, when you're at the brinks of destruction, man tends to look and feel so hopeless that change occurs.
Right.
When you're so fat that you're gonna die, you go.
When your back's up against the wall, that's when you change.
When you go to the doctor and say one more cigarette and you're dead, you quit smoking.
Exactly.
You don't like quit smoking gradually at that point.
So people wait until it's too late.
So human nature, basically, is that this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Your actual safety has to be in jeopardy for you to realize something is off. That's why this pandemic is so good at awakening people.
Right.
Because your safety is at jeopardy.
Yeah.
Your safety of control is at jeopardy. Your safety of economical safety is at jeopardy. So
all of a sudden,
your ass is completely against the wall.
Right.
Especially if you're not like pre-saved money, if you haven't put money aside for weeks and years, you're done.
Right.
You're done. So to get back to your point about the Superman, the idea of a Superman has nothing to do with money.
Right.
It has to be it has to do with raising yourself to a higher level of consciousness. And what I'm trying to explain here is that that's even very far-fetched for people. Because we're talking about a 20, 30-year journey.
Can you make it, can you explain it in a way where basically somebody right now, you can ask them a question or tell them something that will make them realize their own level of consciousness, where they're at now,
but listen,
and how they can raise it.
I post things on my Instagram all the time saying to people, listen, you gotta understand that when you're poor, right? So you change it,
right?
Like, so you don't fall victim.
Realize where you're at.
So you don't fall victim to.
So step one is realize where you're at.
Well, but that realization has to be truly accepted, because if I believe I'm rich, and I'm saying, for example, I make $10 million a year and I'm rich, to someone making $100,000, I'm very rich. Right. To someone making $50,000, I'm very rich. To someone making $12 an hour, I'm very rich, right?
So you're saying that,
but I have friends
your realization has to come from not a biased perspective.
Right. So, but I have friends that make $1 million a day.
Yeah.
And therefore I'm very poor.
Right.
In that context, right? Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that we can all agree that everybody has different perspective of rich or poor.
Sure.
But we can also all agree on the basic minimum need to have financial freedom.
Yeah.
And while some people will say, well, I'm not poor, but I'm not rich.
Right.
They need to get rid of that mentality that they're maybe in the middle.
Right.
Because they're not. The middle is the journey. It doesn't have
an
an indicator.
It doesn't have to do with money, then
well, I'm going to tell you, right? But
this is the
mindset. So the mindset has to be an acceptance of either you're where you want to be or you're not. There's no like, oh, but I'm like doing well for myself. No, you're not. Because in that word alone, I'm doing well for myself, you're justifying why you're not there. So that in itself is off. So where the Superman takes place is mastery of the man, the human, And you can't master the human without mastering circumstance, society, and then getting to life. So the concept, again, comes back to the same exact mode. One cannot progress to even discover the Superman. One cannot even progress to becoming any aspect of self-actualized, any aspect of true love or anything else without having mastered society. Because what happens is your mind, which is a very powerful thing, keeps constraining itself over and over and fighting itself against all of these things, which is prison, no prison, prison, no prison. Right. And so you have to choose. Either you're free or you're not. Just like you can't say I'm on my way out of prison. You're either in prison or you're not. Like just because you're in the general population does not mean you're less in a prison than if you're in solitary. You're still in prison. So you got to get out of prison. And the prison that we're talking about here is your mental prison that you've been conditioned to accept, such as the religion you've been conditioned to follow, the actual society you've been conditioned to think is your enemy. And again, like all of these constraints you've created, just even in your head, the limitation of you can be who you want to be. How many times did your parents tell you, you got to have realistic goals? Like you can't be focusing on things that you can't become an astronaut, get back to reality. Like you can't be a movie star.
I know, my parents honestly never told me that.
But that's why you're creative. Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. Like
my parents never told me anything.
If you are allowed,
go get it.
If you're in an environment that allows, basically your creativity,
exactly.
Then you will get to a place where your imagination will run wild. Right. But here's where they fucked up with you, is they gave you too much of that freedom.
Yeah. So now
you have to come back and say, well, now I want to be free. I want to do all these things. I want to be an astronaut. But they never told you, well, to be an astronaut,
you have to
first you need to maybe be a scientist.
Yeah.
And then you go, well, wait, a scientist, you need to go to school 10 years.
Yeah.
I want to go to space. And it's like, but that's not how that works. Right. There's a process for that. And so the point here is no different than the point we've been making through this video, is that everything comes through a progressive road. And young people want to go from 0 to 100. They don't realize they got to go from negative 100 to 0 to be in a starting position. It goes from 0 to 50 and 50 to 100. So before we even get into the Superman talks in the few weeks and all these conversations, I think we should make note that it's very important for people to pay attention to this very simple concept. No mastery of society, no mastery of life.